One of the women laughed and crossed her arms with Luo, because their client had given them an ultimatum a long time ago that if they were not satisfied with the project, they would cancel the order. Director Hai smiled at the boy and said that he liked brave men like him. He gave Luo until noon to find a famous personality and present the project to the client. He also warned him that if he failed, all losses would be deducted from his salary. But Luo immediately said that he would not keep them waiting until noon because he could find such a person at that very moment. At first, everyone in the sales office was stunned by the guy's words. But a moment later, Director Hai and his colleagues began to laugh at the absurdity of what they heard. But for Xiaoman, it became a reason to be embarrassed and sweaty. Soon, Hai was laughing with his colleagues in the whole department, except for Xiaoman, who stood silently aside. Wiping away his tears, Hai asked Luo if he had had too much to drink last night, and explained that a celebrity should be at least a middle-class artist. Her colleague asked if her boyfriend was okay, and Xian added that she thought he was at least a poor man when they studied together. Xiaoman felt ashamed and humiliated when she heard from women that her Luo was trying to look cool at all costs. At the same moment, the guy took his phone out of his pocket and made a call for his friend. He said he needed her help and sent her the address where she was supposed to come. After that, Xiaoman angrily pursed her lips because she was unable to tolerate his arrogant behavior any longer. She couldn't help but shout at her boyfriend to stop immediately. After that, she turned around and walked away from the boyfriend, clenching her teeth. Her head was steaming with anger, and Director Hai felt embarrassed by the situation. So he decided to hush up their conflict and calmly ordered everyone to go to their workplaces. But in reality, he was still smiling and decided to wait for Luo Qin's celebrity, and then reconvene with his colleagues. Outside their office, there was a checkpoint with a barrier, and a guard stood by with a cigarette in his hand. Soon, Director Hai came outside, smiling happily as he looked at his phone screen. The guard approached the director and asked him why he was so happy and offered him his cigarette. The director said that they had a new guy in the department and he had given him the task of finding a celebrity and preparing a project plan with her. But no one could have imagined that he would swear that he wouldn't even have to go anywhere to bring the star to them. The men laughed at this together, and the guard said that the man must have big problems with his head if he was bragging so much. However, he told the director that sometimes in their society there are very different people, so by pure chance he could have brought a celebrity to them. Director Hai sent a security guard and said that if this boy had such skills, why would he want to work for them? In addition, if the newcomer copes with the task, he promised to eat the feces standing on his hands. Suddenly, a notification sounded about the barrier. An unregistered car with a temporary license plate had pulled up and asked for permission to enter. The guard approached the car and asked the woman driving who she was visiting. The woman took off her glasses, greeted him, and realized that she still did not know the name of the man. The security guard was breathless when he saw the woman's face because he recognized her as the famous and beautiful Lan Bayer, who was dressed in expensive branded clothes and driving her red car. Hearing the name of the guest, the director felt uncomfortable and literally spat the cigarette out of his mouth and was extremely surprised by her visit. Meanwhile, at the Tango Media Company, in the sales office, all of Xiaoman's colleagues were discussing her loser boyfriend, who was doomed to fail the assignment. When Luo was flipping through the pages of the contract to clarify all the details, Xiaoman came up to him and addressed him. The girl was annoyed because she did not understand what it all meant and thought that the guy wanted to embarrass her in front of all his colleagues. In contrast, the guy said with a calm expression that he did not understand why he was embarrassing her. Then she said that he really disappointed her because she knew him well enough and could not believe how he had such connections to sign a contract with a celebrity. The girl also asked why he was lying to appear cool. In response, Luo asked why she didn't do anything when her director surnamed Zhang, was digging a hole for him. This made the girl even angrier, and she continued to yell at her boyfriend. Meanwhile, outside, a security guard was barely holding back the crowd of people trying to get an autograph or take a picture with the beautiful lawn buyer. When the girl approached the office, she went to meet her friend Luo. The director and his beloved girlfriend watched in shock at the overwhelming crowd of people who came to see their guest. The director began to get angry because the situation was crossing all boundaries. He no longer believed Xingxin's words that this guy was just a poor fool. But she said that their guest didn't even have to come to see Luo. The director's face twisted as he hoped it was just a strange coincidence. When the door to the sales office opened, a fragile Lan was already standing on the threshold. She carefully fixed her hair and walked over to the desk next to Xiaoman, who was shocked to see such a celebrity in their office. Suddenly, Lan stopped in her tracks as she spotted the person she was looking for. In a moment, she leaned her hands on Luo's desk and was happy to have finally found him. Xiaoman was clearly not happy about the guest and was shocked that her boyfriend had brought a celebrity to their office. While I was thinking about it and recovering from the shock, the beautiful Lan was staring at Duchen. After a moment, the boyfriend asked her to sit down next to him and review their client's requirements and give him a price if she was satisfied. Lonnie was surprised that Luo actually called her for business, because she thought he was just looking for a reason to meet. She wasn't disappointed though, because after all, her director, Wang Fu, hadn't looked for her since last night. She realized that most likely this guy had connections from above. Otherwise, given Wang Fu's vindictive nature, he would never have left it at that. In the morning, she had regretted not asking for his number, but now that she had a business relationship with him, she no longer had to worry about how to get close to him. Luo interrupted her thoughts by asking her how she had arrived at his office so quickly. Then everything inside Lan blossomed because she was pleased with Luo's interest in her. So the girl sincerely answered that when he called her, she was just nearby and said that it was a kind of fate that helped them. Meanwhile, Xiaoman was looking at them and wondering how Luochen and Lan Bei could have met, because even if they were from the same city, it was still unrealistic. But suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by Lan herself, who kindly asked her to close the door because there were a bunch of her fans behind it, who were being very noisy. Today I looked at the door between which a security guard stood holding back the crowd. The man ordered everyone to disperse because at that moment Lan Bayer was discussing a business proposal in the office. Meanwhile, outside the Nidalpi, employees stood and told another man who had just come up that a newcomer from the sales department had brought superstar Lan Bayer to their office. The man was so shocked that he broke the cookie he was holding in his hand. After all, Lan had recently starred in several movies that had recently grossed more than $2 billion at the box office. Their conversation was interrupted by Director Hai and his beloved Xian Qin, who ordered them to pass. The man with a raised tone told everyone to stop forming a crowd and quickly go to their workplaces. After all, he still wanted to see what was happening behind the door. And the moment he was about to enter the department, his face hit the strong wooden door. Then all the employees and subordinates started laughing at their director and his beloved Xian. Just then, Xiaoman closed the door at the request of their guest. The girl was angry because the obnoxious star started bossing her around in front of her boyfriend Luo. It looked as if she was just lazing around. Soon, Lazy said, she agreed to become a spokesperson, and after a while her agent was supposed to get in touch to discuss the priority dates with him. And when the guy asked what he would have to pay, Lan told him to promise her something, and then he wouldn't have to pay. Luo was surprised and asked what he had to promise her. Then Lan moved closer to the boy and invited him to lunch and emphasized that he had to accept. Later, when Luo was standing outside Lan's car, the girl watched him closely, and before she drove away, she told him not to forget his promise. The man confirmed it, and said goodbye to his new acquaintance. As she drove off, she looked at him in the side mirror of the car and said with a smile that he could not escape her. As the man headed to the office, he saw 3 of his colleagues aggressively fighting with each other near the glass office door. As he got closer, he heard one of his colleagues asking him to let him help with the project. The others immediately wanted to offer him help, one in front of the other, if only Laws could get one of them an autograph from Lanier. Looking at this picture, Director Hai still did not understand how this guy had such a relationship with Lan, since she did not even know his name until recently. The irritated man believed that the boy probably did it on purpose. Then Xingxing tried to calm him down, because in her opinion, he was just messing with Lan Bayer's head. But the man only yelled at the woman, saying that she was trying to deceive him because she was a master at messing with people's minds. Then the girl suggested that the 2 of them look for a reason to fire her as soon as possible. But the man said that it was a bad idea because today the whole company found out that he had resolved an issue with a major client, and if he fired him, what would people think of him? The girl was confused and tried to think of another way out of this situation for them. But he told her not to worry because he promised to take care of it. After all, on his first day at work, he had already shown his disrespect for his manager, and he could not forgive him for that. The man squeezed his eyes shut and remembered that tonight they were going to a restaurant with the whole department. So he told Li Jue to call Kai to teach this boy a lesson. Then she smiled slyly as she began to understand her beloved manager's plan. When dusk fell, Director Hai invited all his employees to follow him. Then all the employees marveled at the beautiful place of their meeting and looked at the incredible glow that was spreading down the street from the largest entertainment center in Tangzhou, Willy Haiyu. Luo was also looking at the large-scale shopping center with everyone else, but he was not as excited about it as the others. A moment later, he heard someone say that their boss Zhang was so incredible that no one could have thought he would invite them there. Behind him stood 2 girls, who were looking at the building with big eyes because they had never dared to go inside before and had only been looking at it all the time. Then it became very interesting for Luo to listen to other people and to go and get to know the employees of the company. He also wanted to see if there were any people he could use for personal gain. Suddenly, a burly man approached the director, who was standing by the lamppost with his girlfriend. The director saw his employee nearby with a man named Kai. Hai greeted him kindly and said that he had not seen him for a long time. While shaking hands, Hai asked the man where he was working now. The man replied that he was not doing anything special at the moment and was just doing some work for Biao. The director was surprised to hear the name of the boss of the Tango underworld and immediately praised Kai, saying that he was too cool. After that, Kai threw his arm around the director's neck in a friendly manner and said that he had heard that an interesting person had joined their department today. So he asked the Kai if he could introduce them. The director smiled slyly and pointed to Luo, who was standing not far from them. The man added that this was the boyfriend of a beautiful woman in their department named Zhang Xiaoman. As Luo stood silently by the bustling crowd, Kai abruptly removed his hand from the director's shoulder and walked toward the boy with a determined look. When he was approaching, man also noticed Wang Kai and did not understand what this madman was doing there. In a moment, Wang Kai turned to Luo Chen to meet him. However, the guy gave him an indifferent look and calmly asked if they knew each other. Without waiting for an answer, he stood up and stepped aside, telling him not to block his way. Kai was no less shocked than everyone else present when he heard this, along with Xiaoman, who also did not expect this turn of events. However, Kai gathered himself and realized that the guy was quite brave and wondered if he would remain as cool later. Observing this situation, Director Hai thought that the sideways brow was worthy of provoking the Kai at the beginning of the evening, so he was looking forward to something interesting. Soon the evening was in full swing with all the employees enjoying a feast in the glowing hall with panoramic windows. Then Kai and the others shared a glass of wine and congratulated Mr. Zhang on his new car purchase, and Director Hai gave him a friendly pat on the back. Meanwhile, Yuman came up to him and asked him how he had met the doe-eyed woman. At first, he decided not to answer this question. But when his girlfriend asked him again in a raised voice, he said that it was none of her business. This made the girl stunned, because she did not want to accept such an answer. The emotional conversation between the couple was noticed by Kai, who was happy that the girl was unhappy and fighting with her boyfriend. Then the Kai put his hand on the director's shoulder and said that in his opinion, everyone was already full and drunk. So he asked why not go up the mountain and have some fun. Hearing this proposal, the director was embarrassed and wanted to object to Kai, but the man immediately said that nothing would happen because the hall belonged to Biao, and he knew everything there. Kai furrowed his brow and said that all he needed from the director was to bring Luo Qin to him, and to let him do the rest. He was sweating a little, but agreed to Kai's condition. Soon after, when Kai, the girls, and Director Hai arrived at the underground hall, everyone was amazed at the number of people there. Kai explained to them that in the outer zone the upper limit for open chips was only 1,000, so not many people were playing there. However, in the inner zone there were no chip limits, so it was much more interesting. Xian asked if he knew anything about it, and his girlfriend said that she and Kai go there every weekend, but this was the first time they had ever entered the inside zone. At the same time, Director Hai held out his card with 50,000 on it for Xiaoming to try her luck. Xiaoman then looked at the loving couple of Xinxin and Director Hai in irritation. The director turned to the locution and invited him to go play with Xiaoman and try his luck as well. But when Wuman wanted to go and play, Luo stopped her, saying that in this casino, out of 10 games, 9 were lost. Akai said that if he didn't have any money, he should just say so, because his nice words were meaningless. And his girlfriend added that if he didn't want to play, he shouldn't spoil the mood of others. Then the girl could not contain her anger any longer. She pushed her boyfriend away and said that he would not go and she would. And when Luo said that she shouldn't go there, the girl angrily shouted that it was none of his business. And all Luo could do was watch Xiaoman walk away and join her India's friends, who were happy with her choice. Then Kai smiled slyly and told the director that their fish was hooked. Soon, when the man in the suit dealt the cards to all the players, all of them except Xiaoman were determined and felt at ease on the field of play. Xian was also one of the players, and she was closely watching the movements of the man who was placing the cards on the table. When the 3 cards were on the table, one of the players told everyone that he was doubling his bet. Xian said she was also raising hers, while the other players said they were folding. The girl Kaya also said that she was out. After a moment, she turned to Xiaoman and advised her that it was best to discard the cards if they were bad. However, Xiaoman hesitantly said that she would double her bet, and immediately after she said that, the cards were revealed. And when everyone was waiting for the cards to be revealed, Kai was watching Xiaoman closely. Suddenly, the girl heard that she had a flush piano and could take all the chips. At the same moment, Xiaoman's eyes lit up as she looked at the money and realized her winnings. Then the girl sincerely began to rejoice in her victory. When she was taking her money, 2 colleagues were discussing her and were surprised that she was able to raise 20 out of some 3,000 in 5 rounds. One of them called his boss over to see how well his girlfriend was doing and suggested that they try playing as well. The other one asked why he was calling him, as he was worried that the Chizen director would deal with him right away. However, the man said that he liked such decent people as Luo Qin, because he believed that he probably had great connections. Then the man interrupted their conversation by saying that gambling was a game that was better left untouched. He also noticed the guy and thought he was not bad, making sure that not all people in the sales department were sycophants after all. Luo said that they could not beat these avid card players because the fact that they were losing the money was just a trick. Then the men looked at each other in embarrassment and said they would leave as soon as they won and not get involved in this fight. As they were heading to the gambling table, one of the men turned to Luo and said that if he did not want to leave, they would go together. The man sighed heavily and did not stop his colleagues from this idea. Soon, when the man in the red suit was shuffling the cards and dealing them to the players, everyone was waiting for the new game to begin. Soon, one of the players bet all the chips he had and smiled slyly at the other players. Xiaoman and her colleague were shocked to see this bet. Xian was also worried, along with the newcomers and Kai, who gritted his teeth in frustration. Then the Kai got up from his seat and approached a player named Lao Li, asking what he was doing, since he had teamed up with him to destroy Xiaoman at any cost, and he decided to beat them. Lao replied that he had a principle that he should treat everyone equally well at the gambling table because their money would not always be theirs. Then Kai asked if he was mocking him, to which Lao slyly replied that anything was possible. Then one of the players turned to the Kai and told him to leave if he didn't want to play anymore. Confused and angry, Kai told the bench that he would deal with him later. Going back to his seat, the Kai told his girlfriend to bring him another 200,000 because he was about to start playing. Then Luo approached his two colleagues and told them to stop because they could not win, and if they were left without money, the company would not help them. But one of the men said that he was playing with credit card money, and if he came back without winning, he would only eat the ground for the next month. Then the second man said he was also playing with borrowed money, and was unlucky for a few rounds, but he believed that because of the flow of feng shui, he could not lose forever. Soon the director approached the Kai and asked him how things were going with his friends there. After all, they wanted to use shaman to dig a hole for Lo Chung, but it turned out that most of them lost a lot of money there. Protikai told him not to talk nonsense. A few rounds later, Kai put his cards on the table and said that he was tripling everything and asked everyone to open their cards. He did not believe that it was possible to lose with such cards, even though they did not have much money left. In a moment, Lao had a quad, and he sarcastically apologized to the Kai for losing. The dealer then informed the Kai that his cash bet was larger than his chips, so he asked him to go to the exchange office to settle the debt. Then the angry Kai said that Lao was definitely cheating, and Lao's colleagues agreed with him because he had won more than 10 rounds and could not be so lucky. Then the guards came to the edge and said that if the Kai likes to play, then let him love to lose, without making a scandal in their institution. Then the Kai turned around and asked them why they were not worried about Lao cheating. After that, he asked the guards if they knew he was working for Biao. Suddenly, a burly man with big muscles and scars on his face approached them, and was genuinely surprised by what Kai said. It was Biao's chief bodyguard named Dao. He was irritated and asked who was working for Biao. The Kai immediately felt cold inside, and cold sweat ran down his forehead. The Tao had told him to take a step forward to look at him. Then the crowd of players suddenly began to disperse, and the Kai began to step back in fear as the Tao approached him. Looking into the eyes of the burly man, Kai was embarrassed and confusedly called the Taoist his brother. In a moment, the Tao hit him in the face with his strong big hand. After this blow, Kai could barely crawl on his knees with his cheeks swollen to the side. As the girls and the director looked at the Kai in fear, the Taoist disdainfully addressed him and asked what right he had to call him brother. The guard approached the Kai and said that he had a lot of courage if he dared to use Biao's name. A moment later, Kai apologized to Tao as he looked at Luo's colleagues with a menacing expression. Then the Tao looked at them and said that he had just heard them talking about someone cheating. The disfigured Kai turned to the guard and pointed his finger at the rascal Lao who had cheated during the game. But the Tao kicked him again because he did not ask him. Then the Tao asked the director if they knew that their gambling hall was the most honest in the whole of Tanzhou. And if they said that someone was cheating there, they probably wanted to ruin Biao's reputation. But let him say that no one had such an intention, and it was all a simple misunderstanding. But the Tao sternly told them not to tell him whether it was a misunderstanding or not. After that, he sat down next to the gambling table and ordered them to continue playing. He said that he would sit on the side and watch Lolly to make sure that he would not dare to play dishonestly. The man said that if they returned the entire amount they lost, they could consider the case closed. However, the frightened men from the office told the Taoists that they had lost every penny. Then the man said that he would lend them money, but they would have to pay back 3 times the amount borrowed. At that moment, all those present opened their mouths at the conditions set by the burly guard. The bewildered men did not understand how they could win such a sum of money, thinking that the guard wanted to harm them even more. Then the Taoist asked them with an angry and at the same time arrogant look why they did not want to play. And when the men standing in front of him were trembling with fear and barely holding each other's hands, a young man approached them and asked them to lend him 100,000. At the same moment, the men, along with Xiaoman, began to dissuade him from this idea, because with such interest, he would have to pay back 300,000. However, Luo looked at them slyly, waved his hand, and said that he just needed to get even. For one of the men, his action was a shot to the heart. Dao asked the man if he understood that even if he lent him 100,000, he would have to pay him back 300,000 later. But Luo calmly looked into Lao's eyes and told them to stop talking and start dealing cards. When the dealer dealt the cards, Lao looked doubtfully at the guy in front of him. At the same time, Luo calmly said that he was betting everything he had. Xiaoman yelled at the guy, not understanding what he was doing because he didn't even look at his cards. Director Hai shouted that he was going to ruin them all. After all, if he lost, he would drag them down with him. He believed that they would no doubt be greatly disgraced today. He sat at the table and noticed that a guy with such abilities also dared to stand up for others. Soon, Lao had 3 queens, and he asked Luo to reveal his cards. At the same moment, Luo smiled arrogantly and asked him to forgive him for winning. Dao and Lao were stunned to see the boy throw the 2 king cards on the game table. The principal, along with Kai and his girlfriend, could not believe how he did it. They believed that he was just lucky, but in Texas poker, you couldn't resist. So Law slammed his fist on the table with wide eyes and asked to play again. A few rounds later, Luo was sitting happily with a pile of chips next to him. His colleagues watched his success with shining eyes and open mouths. Luo calmly told the guard that there was 1,400,000, namely all the money they had lost before. The man was frozen in a stupor because he could not understand how he won every blind. After all, he knew Lowly and his art in gambling, and he was known as a heartless man and could not have cheated on purpose. The cards were also dealt by his man, so he knew that this guy named Sucker had no way of cheating. The man turned to the security guard and said that he was returning the 300,000 to him as he had said, and they could be free. Dao was confused and could not get a word out. Suddenly, a voice came from behind him and said that everyone was free to leave, but the guy had to stay. At the same moment, a man in a gray suit entered the hall, accompanied by a whole group of serious guards. The guard shouted out Biao's name with tears in his eyes when he saw him in front of him. At the same moment, the venerable Biao looked into the eyes of the puzzled Luo Chen. As the man approached the boy, everyone present could not believe that they were seeing the king of the underground Tancho world named Hong Biao. After looking at the boy, the boss ordered his bodyguard Dao to clear the hall, to which the bodyguard meekly agreed. When the Dao approached the players, they were all sweating and looking at the burly guard in confusion and fear. Then the Taoist sternly told them that everyone except this guy could leave. Everyone present was stunned to hear the guard's words, but Lao put his hood over his head and did not miss the opportunity to leave the place immediately. Director Hai sincerely thanked the burly man and said that she would leave right away, after which Kai pulled his girlfriend's hand and said that it was time for them to go. Xiaoman thought for a moment, not knowing what to do in this situation, and her male colleagues looked at each other anxiously. However, in a moment, the Taoist told the three of them to leave the place quickly to avoid any problems. And when one of the men wanted to say something back to the guard, Luo said that even if they stayed, they would not help him. The men were embarrassed and did not want to leave Duchen alone with these men, and Xiaoman was hesitant about what to do. In the end, she turned around and told her colleagues to leave with her. Soon after, on the first level of the underground parking lot of Villa Haiyu, one of the men said that they could not be considered Luo Qin's true friends because he had stood up for them. But Xiaoman said that they had no other choice because Hong Biao was still against him. Then the other man said that the girl was right because there was nothing they could do in this case. They could only hope that he would be okay. Meanwhile, in the inner hall of the Haiyu Villa Casino, Luo Qin stood calmly in front of Biao and asked him if he really wanted him to stay here. Then Biao took out a luxury cigarette and tilted his head for one of the guards to get a lighter and light it. He told the guy not to worry because he was just interested in his card art. He just wanted to talk to him, that's all. However, Luo defiantly said that he had nothing to talk to him about. At the same moment, Dala got angry with the guy and asked how he dared to talk to Biao like that if he didn't want to die. But the venerable Biao stopped his bodyguard's impulse and ordered him to wait. The man shook the ashes from his cigarette onto his bodyguard's t-shirt and said that if he was so straightforward, he would also speak directly. Biao offered him the choice of either working for him or being left with nothing. Hearing these words, Long Chen began to laugh loudly in the man's face, but in a moment his face became very serious because he said that there was no one here who could leave him with nothing. Biao looked at the man with excitement and said that judging by his words, he was not thinking about working for him at all. But Luo's words only made him smile. Then the man looked at Biao indifferently and asked him who he thought he was. The man's words made him extremely angry, and he stormed out of his seat, saying that he did not appreciate his good attitude towards him. So in a moment, he turned to the Tao, which understood his master without words. The burly guard took out a small knife, because he had long wanted to finish him off. Looking at him, Luo saw that the guard had already killed many people with his own hands. Then Tao thought that the guy was finally afraid of him, but it was too late. Finally, he told Luo to remember in his next life that in this world not everyone can be messed with. But Luo said that he was wrong, because there was no one in this world who would dare to contact him. So Luo decided to bring back his words for Tao. Then Luo pointed his finger in the man's direction, and a powerful magic ball instantly threw the man back a few meters. After that, Luo noticed that the Wuji Emperor's breathing was slightly weaker again. So until he finds a good seed, he will have to use it sparingly. Meanwhile, the guards watched in shock as the guy, like a true master with incredible martial skills, dealt with the Tao with one blow. However, Biao did not lose his temper and ordered his men not to panic, because they were outnumbered and could overcome him. Biao was anxiously flipping through the contacts on his phone to call for reinforcements immediately. Otherwise, if all these events were reported, they would be able to conduct business in the Tanju. In a moment, Biao realized that his men were not holding out for long and was already calling someone, but the rings continued and no one answered the phone. A moment later, he was startled by the sudden silence behind him. The man turned around in fear and saw Luo Qin, completely unharmed, with the guards behind him, not moving. The man slowly walked over to Biao and asked him with a smile if he had gotten through. When the man did get through, a woman's voice began to ask what happened to Biao. But he did not dare to say anything in front of the powerful figure of the locution. Then the guy with an interested expression told him to answer for the girl. But Biao was frozen in stupor and fear of him, sitting on the floor. By then, it was already late at night. In one of the villas on the other side of the phone, a worried girl was talking to Biao. Suddenly, a burly man came running to her and asked if she had called him, and she said that she was most likely in big trouble. So she asked him to prepare the car so that they could go to him quickly, because they had to hurry. The man immediately understood her and rushed to start the car. Then he breathed a sigh of relief, although he admitted that he had underestimated his abilities that day. He admitted that he did have some talent, but said that he could not rely on his wits to run wild in Tangzhou. The man happily said that the people he had called would soon be here, and that even if there were 10 people like him, he would still not win. Hearing these words, Luo was surprised and told him to tell his men to hurry up and come to him. Biao looked at the boy with disgust and realized that he was still too young. And when he was looking for something on his phone, Luo turned to him and said that waiting for people was very boring. So he came closer to him and offered to play something before they came. Thoughtfully adjusting his glasses, Luo asked the man if he knew a game called 1000-7. Soon after, when the girl and her master arrived at the entrance to the same entertainment center where the casino was located, the guards respectfully paid homage to the master. And when the man asked the guards what was going on in the treasury and why they were not inside, they replied that half an hour ago Biao had ordered them to clear the hall, so they left. Then the man struck him in the nose with his hand, calling him a fool. Soon after, when the master and the girl took the elevator to the second floor of the casino, he was extremely surprised to see a bunch of unconscious guards everywhere and complete chaos in the hall. The man and the girl still couldn't figure out who Biao had finally offended. Suddenly, they moved on and heard the scream of a man they were not looking for. Biao was sitting mutilated on the floor, holding his head with his hand in pain. He called Luo insulting names and said that he didn't care who he was because he intended to kill him that day. At that moment, Luo looked at the man menacingly and heard him snarling and realized that he seemed to have had enough of him. But the frightened man told him to stay away from him. Suddenly, he heard the familiar voice of his beloved sister behind him. When the man saw Master Yu, he was very happy and asked them to save him from the lock as soon as possible. But the girl suddenly recognized the man as her teacher. Then Luo also recognized Shuangri and thought that she had come just in time. Then Biao began to continue to insult Luo through tears, saying that even he was so special and that he was nothing more than a mere student before Master Yu. And then his words were interrupted by Shuangri, who calmly slapped her husband on the cheek. After that, she furiously asked the man how he dared, and Biao fell into a stupor because he did not understand his sister's behavior. Zamida paid homage to Luo and apologized for their failure to properly supervise their dog and thus offended the teacher. Watching all this, Biao was shocked and could not believe that this young man was his sister's teacher. Then Luo looked at his embarrassed face with a smile and was glad that it had happened. Biao was beside himself realizing all this. After that, Shuang returned to her brother and told him to open his eyes and listen carefully to the fact that the man was her teacher and an honored guest in their family. After all, Luo had even met her grandfather in person, so she told him to address him as Mr. Luo. When Biao realized his sister's words, he was confused at first, and then got down on his knees and began to tearfully beg Mr. Luo's forgiveness. After that, he stood up and said in confusion that he did not know who he was dealing with and therefore offended him. So he asked Mr. Luo to be lenient with him. At first, Mr. Luo looked at the man with a cold gaze, both stern and calm. And then, he just slowly walked away from the man in the opposite direction. Biao thought that his life would end in that moment. Then Shuangri turned to her teacher and wanted to stand up for her brother, but Luo stopped the girl with one gesture of his hand. He said that if this was his man, he decided to leave him to her, and added that she did not have to ask his opinion. The girl was overjoyed to hear this, and turned to her brother to quickly thank Mr. Loza for being lenient and not destroying him. Then her brother quickly and tearfully thanked Mr. Luo several times in a row. And when the man was about to leave, Shuangrai called out to him and tried to stop him. When Mr. Luo left the school through the back door to the street, the girl barely had time to catch up with her teacher. The man calmly stopped and looked at the out-of-breath girl, who was trying to tell him something. After a moment, the girl caught her breath and held out an invitation letter to the Tango auction. After all, her grandfather had asked her to give it to him when she had the opportunity. Duchen was surprised and asked her why he thought that. So she explained to him by reminding him of the wooden box from the painting he had received at their first meeting. The man realized that it was his wooden box with magic seeds. And when he asked what was wrong with it, the girl was embarrassed and said that everything was fine, but her grandfather noticed that he was interested in her and wanted to invite him to this auction. After all, this wooden box was originally going to be put up for that auction. Looking at the invitation, the guy was pleasantly surprised. However, he realized that her family was doing everything possible to draw his attention to them. But the man was afraid that it could bring him a lot of trouble. However, without hesitation, he agreed to accept the girl's invitation letter and told her to tell her grandfather how grateful he was. The girl was happy, and when the man headed home, she said she would pick him up tomorrow morning. But Luo Wuji got into a taxi and said he would get there himself. Soon after, as the guard was gently treating Biao's face, the mangled and bandaged Dao turned to his master and asked if the guy they had run into was really his sister's teacher. But the embarrassed man replied that he should not ask, because today they had disgraced themselves and were defeated. After that, the man turned to everyone and told them to remember that the next time they saw him, they should be respectful to him. In addition, he asked the Taoists to prepare expensive gifts so that he could come to him personally and apologize again. Because even if they did not have the opportunity to make friends with people of such status, they could not remain enemies with him in any case. Soon, in the prestigious establishment with modern fountains at the entrance to the living rooms of the Yamaha Hotel, Luo Wuji stood adjusting the tie on his suit. Behind the reception desk stood a man in an orange suit who kindly addressed him and asked to see his invitation. Then Luo Wuji showed him his invitation with an indifferent look and, after approval, calmly walked into the guest room. In a huge corridor with a modern geometric interior, the man stood silently on either side of a crowd of respectable people who were talking to each other. Then one of the men approached Chao and said that he had seen a new face in their community. He also heard that he had great connections, so he asked the man to find out more information about him. At the same moment, Chao looked around, not understanding how a new stranger could have appeared there, because all the people who were present there generally knew each other. But suddenly Luo Wuji came into his field of vision. The man was shocked and did not understand how he got there. Chao told his friend that he knew him. The man thought he was really cool and asked him to introduce them and find out what influential family this guy was from. Chao refuted his thoughts, saying that it was all nonsense and Luo Wuji was just a small-town peasant. However, his friend said that this was impossible because that day there was a private auction, not an open one, and a person without connections could not get there. Hearing this, Chao's face became darkly confused. At the same time, Chao assured his friend Lu that he had seen him 2 days ago, and that he was a peasant with no money. The man said that in such circumstances there was no need to get acquainted with him. However, he noticed that the man's eyes were not happy when he saw him. Then he said that this guy had dared to take his girl away from him, and asked him how he thought he should treat him. Lu was surprised to hear this, and thought that the guy was bored with life. However, at the same time he furrowed his brow and waved his hand to tell Chao not to worry, because he was going to help him deal with him. Soon, all the guests were seated in the room where the auction was to be held, all dressed in exquisite dresses and expensive tuxedos. Luo Wuji sat in his seat and flipped through the pages of the auction booklet. Next to him was Chow's friend, who soon turned to the man saying that he had not seen him there before and asked him who he came to this event with. However, the man pretended not to hear Mr. Luo and continued reading the auction booklet. There was a stunned silence between the two men, and when the man got tired of waiting, he broke down and wanted to express his dissatisfaction with Luo's behavior. However, the man was immediately restrained by his friend Chow by the shoulder. The businessman turned to the apprentice and said that his friend had asked him a question and he had not answered, so he thought that the guy was mute or deaf. Lo Hin looked up and calmly said that the wind suddenly blew and raised ripples in the spring waters of the pond. Luo and Chow were shocked by the boy's answer, and Luo asked his friend if the boy was okay because he did not understand what kind of water he was talking about. Suddenly, a woman in a yellow evening dress interrupted their conversation and said that the man's words translated to, "What business is it of yours, sir?" The woman explained that the guy wanted to tell them that it was none of his business, pointing at Luo. Then Luo folded up the booklet and said that such short-sighted people like him need to study more. Otherwise, even to understand that they were offended, they would have to look for an interpreter. Hearing this, the men were extremely angry with Luo Chen, and the woman sitting next to him could hardly contain her laughter. After a moment, Luo began to shout insultingly at Luo to stop throwing around his old sayings, threatening that he could take his life at any second. At that moment, a man wearing a yellow tie and glasses intervened in their conflict, approaching the men and asking what was going on. Then Luo turned to the manager Li, saying that he had come just in time because this unknown guy had strangely entered the auction and started making a scene in the hall. Hearing this, Li turned to Luo Yi and apologized and asked to see his invitation to the auction. The guy asked why he asked him for it, since there were so many other people in the room. But the man refuted his words, saying that he knew all these people, and it was obvious that he did not need to check them. But he had never seen this guy here before, so he said that if Luo did not show his invitation letter, he would have to ask him to leave. Luo Chen just smiled and confidently handed the manager his invitation letter, asking if it would be suitable for him. The men and the manager were shocked to see a real invitation in his hands. After that, the Chow began to shout angrily at the Luo, saying that someone as poor as he was could not have received it, believing the invitation to be fake. After a moment, the manager patted Chow on the back and told the men to be patient, as all this could reflect badly on their reputation. So he suggested that they go upstairs to the upper hall and rest while he sorted things out. Then he waved his hand arrogantly and agreed to give Manager Li this opportunity. After that, he turned to Luo and said that he had already done enough to preserve his reputation, so he hoped that the boy would understand. And on that day, it didn't matter to him whether he had an invitation letter or not, because he had to leave anyway. Because if he was kicked out with a scandal, it would be a very bad situation for everyone. Suddenly, the manager heard a man shouting behind him, asking who dared to say that. He turned his head and saw the venerable elder Yi, who had also come to the hall with his granddaughter and their master. The elderly man angrily asked the manager where he got the courage to kick out the honored guest he had invited. Li was extremely embarrassed and confused because he had not expected such a turn of events. After a moment, he asked the elders if it was really his guest, and Luo thought that they had come just in time, otherwise he would have had to use up the rest of the Wuji Emperor's power in this place. Then he didn't go up to Luo and ask if he was all right, and his granddaughter apologized to her teacher for being late, although Luo said that nothing should have happened to him at all. Seeing that the elder was speaking respectfully to Mr. Luo, the manager thought he was finished, because he had never used polite words before. At the same moment, Elder Yi looked him in the eye and told him that Li had been inattentive. In a moment, Master Yu lifted the manager by his jacket off the ground, who tearfully told the elder that he had been reckless and had made a big mistake. Then the elder became even more angry with him and ordered him to be silent. After that, The elder turned to Mr. Hello and told him that this situation was just a trifle, and he should not be angry with them. At the same time, he ordered his master Yu to deal with Manager Li. When the incident was resolved, Elder Yi invited Mr. Luo to go to the ceremonial hall. Meanwhile, Chow and Lu were drinking alcoholic cocktails in the lounge. Chow said that the manager had been incredibly helpful to Lu, praising him for it. But Lu said that the boy was really far from them. A moment later, Chow's father came up to them and told them that the honorable man was having a guest over, so he asked them to promise not to be rude to anyone at night. The father assured them that they all knew the Honorable Yi and would not provoke his people in any way. In addition, given his father's position, he believed that the Venerable Yi should also show them a little courtesy. Suddenly, 2 guards approached them, and when Chow's father asked the men who they were, a man's voice nearby ordered them to throw them out. Shortly afterward, the men could be heard screaming outside the back door of the building, not understanding what was happening or why they were being kicked out. But Chow's father's supervisor only ordered them to leave menacingly when he managed to push them out the door. And when Chow's father tried to talk to him and find out what was the reason for this behavior towards them, he only got the door slammed in his face. Then Chow went to his angry father trying to explain everything. However, he was immediately slapped in the face by the angry man. The father called his son a bastard and asked whom he had managed to offend that evening, because he had been a member of this society for many years, and this was the first time he had ever disgraced himself so much. Holding his swollen cheek, Chow thought that they had offended no one but Luo Chen. However hard he tried, he could not even imagine that he had such connections and reputation. From any angle, it seemed absolutely impossible to him. Meanwhile, the auction was in full swing, and the auctioneer congratulated number 23 on winning the dragon and phoenix pins worth 170,000 yuan. After striking a wooden gavel, she announced the next lot by pointing to a large digital screen on the stage. I hadn't expected that all the lots that were presented there were works of art or antiques. As he took a sip of coffee, a venerable Yi elder approached him and asked him to wait a little longer because a man was about to join them. The elder then kindly apologized for the inconvenience, but Luo said that everything was fine. He suspected that the elder had invited him for a reason, and it seemed that he really had something to do with him. Then the elder said that in truth the man had been with him for more than 10 years, and he had never suspected him. If he hadn't seen the fake on the train, he would probably still be in the dark. Soon after, the elder was approached by a man who apologized to him for being late. A man in round glasses and white clothes approached them and said that he was late because he was stuck in a traffic jam. Seeing him, the elder looked thoughtfully into Luo Chen's eyes. When the man sat down next to the elder, he saw an interesting guy on his right hand. Then he asked the Venerable Yi who he was, and Yi said that he was a new friend of his who had a great talent in the field of object identification, and whom he was able to invite to this auction today. At first, the man showed surprise and respect for his new friend, but in his mind, he thought that the elder had gone mad. After all, he could not have thought that the man would find a guy who would conduct some kind of expertise. Then he turned to the Lo and apologized for not noticing that they were colleagues with him. And Lo said that he forgave him for that. However, in his mind, the man believed that with his qualifications and experience, calling this boy a colleague was flattering to him. The man intended to teach him a lesson soon, because the boy did not even compliment him in return, but simply looked down on him. Suddenly, the hostess announced the next and one of the most important items in the auction to all the distinguished executives and guests, and asked them to pay attention to the screen. The woman pointed to an image of an ancient bronze sword from the Eastern Zhou period. It was common knowledge that it was during this period that the skill of ancient bronze smiths reached its peak. At that moment, a white-robed man turned to the Venerable Luo and said that such a sword would be difficult to find in good condition on the market, and the price was attractive, so he recommended that the man buy it. However, Luo told him not to rush into this decision because, in his opinion, this thing was questionable. Then the man in white just smiled at Luo's words and told the guy about his experience of several decades. So he thought that the boy did not know how many checks an item had to go through to get to the auction. However, the guy firmly insisted that the sword was fake. Hearing this, the man in white clothes was extremely angry with the boy. He began to shout furiously at the boy because he believed that he could not evaluate objects just by looking at them. Watching this scene, the elder's granddaughter realized that for some reason this story was quite familiar to her. The man kept shouting that talent alone was not enough for the boy, because he had to have experience and skill like him, the experienced Tang Zhong. However, Luo interrupted him and said that they didn't need this meaningless argument and suggested that they just buy the thing and see who would be right. The white-robed man was embarrassed at first, but then smiled and said that they did not need to wait for other people's expertise because he was sitting next to them. After that, he asked the elder to confirm that he was the best expert in this matter in the whole of Tangzhou. The elder nodded his head, confirming his words. At the same moment, he asked Shuangrai to announce their price, which his granddaughter agreed to. After that, the elder asked Luo not to make a big deal of it, not that he didn't trust him, but his friend Tang was never wrong in his field of expertise. The white-robed man sat there with a look of superiority, knowing that the young man could not match his strength in his field. After all, he had been with the honorable man for more time than he had lived. Soon, the woman announced the price of 3 million yuan for the bronze ancient sword from the Eastern Zhou era, and started the countdown by asking if there were any other bidders in the room. Suddenly, from the balcony in the ceremonial hall, Shuangri raised her number 2 and offered 5 million for the sword. The woman accepted her bid and announced it to all the guests by starting the countdown again. Several guests noticed a respectable man in that seat and realized that no one dared to raise his bid. When the woman counted to 3, she congratulated the number 2 guest on receiving the 5 million yuan lot by tapping the table with a hammer. The man in white turned to the elder and said that all this time he had been studying historical information about the Zhou era. Therefore, today this precious sword has become a very rare thing even among the aristocracy. Turning to Luo, he said that thanks to the sharp gaze of the venerable Yi, they acquired it on this day because in the future it would be extremely difficult. However, the boy pretended not to listen to the man, which made him extremely angry. Then the expert jumped up and started shouting at the man, because he had been restraining himself only because of the venerable Yi. He shouted that he did not expect Luo to be so impolite and dared to provoke him again. As the man continued to shout about his decades of diverse experience, his master approached the elder and began to whisper something in his ear. After a moment, the elder patted his hands to calm his restless expert. He said that the man had made a good point about when the master took out the expert report from his case and showed it to him. The elder asked the man how he would explain it. The cultural relic examination report stated that the bronze ancient sword they had just bought was a genuine, confirmed fake. Then the man was instantly embarrassed because he did not understand how this could happen because all the items that got there were subjected to a multi-level inspection. At that moment, they were joined by Shuangrai, who said that the expert always encouraged her grandfather to buy only fakes because he knew that the elder trusted him and would not give them to the expert. The man told the girl not to slander him, but Shuangrai said her words were true because she had just sent people to investigate the bronze sword and the fake painting from the last time. As a result, they found out that the person who had given these items to the auction was this man. He bribed the auction appraisers to get their fakes into the auction, and then he tricked her grandfather into buying them, and he made a lot of money from that. The girl pushed the man into a dead end and insisted that he admit his guilt without the appraiser he had negotiated with. Realizing that the truth had been revealed, the man collapsed to the floor, leaning his elbow on the chair next to the elderly man. Then the man turned to the elder and began to tearfully explain that he had recently had an unpleasant situation in his family and urgently needed money. But the girl interrupted him and said that the 12 shops that her grandfather had given him were enough to cover his expenses for several lifetimes. And so she asked why he was secretly saving such large sums of money. At that moment, the man could not say anything because he was sweating and his hands were out of control. Then the elder told his master Yu to take the man away from there. And the master grabbed the white-clothed man by the face and torso with his strong hands, not allowing him to do anything. After that, the elder apologized to Luo for the situation, and the man said that there was no problem. Xuangrai was furious because she could not understand why a man who had lived on their support for several decades was so ignoble. However, her grandfather told her that as far as he understood, the man did not risk himself for money. And there was definitely another person who somehow bribed him. Then the granddaughter wondered who within their city could have lured him to their side. And the grandfather said that most likely his old enemy had returned, and he might have to bother Mr. Luo. It was then that the boy realized that this was most likely the real reason why the family was so kind to him. Soon after the last very special item for the day was announced, the man asked everyone to look at the screen. In a moment, a property title map of real estate in the Panlongwang district, with a total area of 120 square kilometers, appeared on it. Its starting price was 1 million yuan. Luo looked at the screen thoughtfully and repeated the name of the Panlongwang district again. The girl asked her teacher if he knew that a few years ago, real estate in this area was worth more than 10 billion, but now it was a problem. Luo Chen was interested in the girl's words, so he asked her to explain why this happened. Xuangri said that before that, all 3 developers of the area had died under mysterious circumstances, along with the entire construction team. In total, dozens of human lives were destroyed in a few years. However, during the investigations, the bodies of the people who died there did not show any injuries or diseases. In addition, the girl whispered in her teacher's ear that yesterday a dead taxi driver was found in the same area, but no injuries were found on him or his car. At that moment, he thought about hearing about the taxi driver from the student. Meanwhile, the anchor announced the last price for a property right in the neighborhood. And if no one bid, they would have to deal with the auction that didn't work out. People in the audience were talking about how this used to be the most expensive piece of land in the whole city. But today, it was given away for almost nothing. But even now no one wanted to buy it, because buying it put the owner in danger of losing his own life. And when a sweaty woman swung a wooden hammer to announce the last price for the property, a male voice from the audience shouted the price of 1 million yuan. As a result, Luo Chen announced to everyone that he was buying a property in the Panlongwang district.